Okay, one thing I want to say is that I left one step out. So I don't know if everybody was in the room, but it computes all the matches, that's the light green. And then after it computes all the matches, there's actually one step. It goes through multiple times, but one step where it with the geo information and the fact that we've already calculated these points, it goes through one more time and verifies that all the, it does what's called rematching. It verifies that all the points, all the cameras are in actually realistic locations. And sometimes it can throw out cameras. It doesn't look like it did in this case. On that step as well. So that's the rematching step. It calls it rematching, and then it calls it optimizing with geo information. Then it does rematch, and then it does it again. It's a few-step process, but that step was one that I didn't mention. It does change everything back to dark green that it's able to do through the second matching, the geolocation matching. Okay, so this is the quality report that's been created. It's the output of the result. By default, this will display automatically. This is kind of just a quick summary of your inputs. So we talked about most of our inputs before, but it does tell you quickly what the spatial resolution that it calculated for your data is. It calculated that your data produced a 2.5 centimeter spatial resolution. You could have calculated that beforehand, but this is actually what it resulted in, and it thinks that's the best possible resolution to consider your data at, which is about 1 inch. Pretty cool. 400 feet, what we flew at, or 300 feet about what we flew at. Somewhere between 300 and 400 feet. And it also tells you about how much area you mapped. So that's the summary of your inputs. Here's a summary of your outputs. Right now we have 20,857 key points per image. That's a fair bit of key points, and it's telling you that. You did a good job. Your data has enough key points. That's what that green thinks. That's in general. We're going to be able to see the individual matches between images in another graphic. All right, so this will also tell you how many of your images were calibrated. It says that they were all calibrated. We saw that as it was processing, but if you weren't watching it, this is where you could find out, oh, how many of my images got thrown out. Right? Here is a number that says 7.21% relative difference between the initial and the optimized internal camera parameters. In other words, the number that Pix4D gave it in its memory and what it calculated was the actual location of the cameras, and then it recalculated the image parameters. So it said, well, your lens had this much distortion, but in reality, I think it had a little bit more distortion. That's the one that it actually used. Okay. It's not too surprising. You'd expect this to go down a little bit if we used the full resolution processing, but since we didn't use the full resolution processing, having this under 10% is actually still pretty good. So although this is yellow, it was expected because we didn't use the full resolution. So that error ellipse is going to be bigger, and so it's going to cause the cameras to calculate themselves to be in different positions or their internals to be slightly different. Now, with a non-metric camera, it's actually acceptable, even in the case where we use the full resolution, to be close to this, somewhere around 5%. You're never going to get. I mean, maybe sometimes, but under most conditions, this isn't ever going to get down close to 0. So 7.21 is actually pretty low for a consumer camera anyway, even at full resolution. I've seen it much higher, like with some of those other sports action cameras or the GoPros with the big lens distortion. I've seen this number get up. Still able to do some mapping, but get it up to 20-30%. All right, here's our matches. That was also reported. Or maybe that wasn't reported. Oh yeah, that's the median. The median of that's the number of key points. So this is actually the number of new matches, which is also pretty high, considering it's about half of that number. We got a lot of matches in each image. So you expect that to be about half. A lot of the key points were matched. This one will always be yellow if you don't put your ground control points, which we're going to talk about at the end of this lecture, because that's something that we're going to do up in by here when we go on the field trip. Now here, you can get an idea of what your final result is going to look like. Your final result orthophoto mosaic. I'm going to open this up, and you can see this looks reasonable. That's about all it's useful for, right? We don't have a final result yet. This is just a rough draft, but you can see where it looks like it's correct. You see that building looks like a building. You can even see a few of the path marks. A fair bit of detail. You can see the dam pretty well in the imagery, but you can also see on the edges of the imagery and in the lake that there are some errors, obviously. The water doesn't do this where it's lower and all of a sudden there's a step up to the higher area. So let's look at why that occurred. By scrolling down a little bit further. Okay, so here are all the initial cameras. Now, like I said, it'll actually show in red the cameras that didn't calibrate on this screen, but they all calibrated, so they're all green. This screen is showing you. This screen is showing you the difference between the reported GPS location of the camera and the calculated location of the camera. You can see that there is some discrepancy, and there actually is some spatial pattern going on. If you do have a lot of spatial pattern, you can start to worry a little bit because sometimes what happens, if I go back to this slide over here, sometimes what happens is because of the way the images were taken, if there's some error, it can start to magnify itself, particularly on the edges, and it can assume that the ground was actually going up. In other words, if you allow the camera to be recalibrated, or you allow it to say, oh, that GPS position could be off by as much as 10 meters, then it can slowly say, well, to make this fit, I want to make the software could say, I'm going to make this image go up a little bit higher, this image go up a little bit higher, and it could propagate that error and start to cause drift in your data. So if you ever process your data and you have these sorts of, you can see that for the most part, this area looks fairly random in terms of the error, and it's not very great. So on this edge, it looks like it's definitely shifted. They're all shifted that way, and they're very similar, and they're getting bigger. Here there's a few bigger ones, but most of them are small. And then on this side as well, they're all shifted that way, and they're a little bit bigger. And so my guess is that the accuracy in these areas is lower, which isn't surprising, because on the edges, there's not as much ability for it to recalibrate using the cameras around it and kind of force it into the right place. So this is going to happen all the time. Your best data is going to be in the middle. get an image that's out. We kind of collect data that's outside of the original. But I've seen this where the data gets really bad sometimes, where these errors get really far off. Well, I call them errors, but they're basically just, the cameras, because we're allowing them to adjust their positions a little bit, they can propagate, particularly in a direction where you don't have anything, because you're extrapolating way out here at the end. And then these things on the top and the bottom are actually looking at it from the side view as well. And so you can see the differences in the cameras. It's kind of all collapsed. I'm not sure that it's all that great. But one thing, these error ellipses, you can see how they're bigger at the top and the bottom, and in the middle they're better. Okay? That's pretty typical. This way, since we're not going so linear, they look pretty uniform, actually. But going this way, we definitely get, in the center here, we get less error. Or less uncertainty, I should say. We don't know for sure that it's error, but it probably is. If you see a pattern, it's probably more error than uncertainty. And we do definitely see a pattern there, but it's not huge. I mean, I've seen it be way worse. I've seen it to where you relatively flat area all of a sudden turned up on one side, or turned up on both sides. That's pretty good. Typically, when you have geo information, that's pretty good. Like on the, when I say pretty good, I'm just talking about not survey quality GPS on board the Phantom, but it's decent. Okay, so here's all the overlap between the images. That's really encouraging. If you see areas that are red or yellow in the middle here, that means you didn't have enough overlap. And you'll get that even if you didn't have a few images calibrate. You'll see the effect of that because those images won't be included in this graphic. This is the difference between the initial values that Pix4D gave it for the camera principal point and for this distortion, and these are the values that it got, that it calculated as the principal point and the uncertainties that are listed below it. You can see that, in terms of millimeters, we're talking about a 100th of a millimeter off in terms of where the principal point is, still, a 100th of a principal point, and still only like what 5/100ths of a millimeter off in terms of where the principal point is calculated to be. So when we get all those rays, we're inferring the position of things that are really far away from this little teeny, the sensor is only like, they call it a 1-inch sensor, but it's really 1-inch diagonal. It's like this sensor that's like this, like the size of like my knuckle right here is probably about the same size as the sensor. And so if you think about that, how small that is and where we're inferring things are in real life, that's why a 100th and 5/100ths of a millimeter make some difference. They create some uncertainty because we're projecting a bunch of rays out from something the size of my knuckle and trying to figure out where it is in that big Lake Sehoy area. Okay, here are the number of observed 3D points from, those are the pairs. So this is just kind of like a histogram. In 2 images, they got this many points. In 28 images, there are actually only 13 matches that are found. So where do those occur? Well, this kind of gives you a quick overview of where your good matching occurred and where your bad matching occurred. See, the point here isn't to look at the individual lines, but as they start to coalesce, it makes them darker. So you can see that in the dark areas, there's more matches, there's more lines. In the light areas, there are less matches. There are less lines. So this is the light. You can see in those areas, there were less matches, and that actually caused some more uncertainty in where the camera was located in those areas. You can see that some of those uncertainty ranges are. So this uncertainty range is more often related to gaps in your data or areas where you didn't have key point snapshots. So you would expect here, in the first graph, the errors that you saw and the uncertainty that you saw was more related to the camera accuracy, and of course that's going to go down as you get closer to the edge. This one is more related to the uncertainties created by not having enough overlap or not having enough matches in your data. And so the pattern that exists here is because of the lake and because of the dark area. And remember when it was actually calculating this was the second to last and this was the last area coming in. So there was the least amount of matches that occurred in those two areas. So we could see that. Don't know exactly why this didn't happen, but we could examine that further. If I go back to here, I explained most of this as just being on the edge, but if you did see some bigger accuracies in the middle, bigger uncertainties in the middle, it probably has to do with the fact that the GPS for some reason had some issue mid-flight. That's what you see that. All right. Yeah, so this just gives you so these things that are really light, there's only 25 matches between those two images. Like that. Yeah, so here's just more information on the camera position uncertainty. Here is the overall geolocation error. So we're expecting the X positions to be off by about a meter. That's actually pretty good, pretty high. This is what's much more expected is that sorry, I was highlighting should have been highlighting the RMSE. These two are always the same, but RMSE is the measure that we use a lot more at least in geographic position accuracy. So the RMS error for the X position is around a meter, which is pretty low. You'd normally expect it to be in the range from 3 to 5 meters, as I said before. And then this is actually also pretty low, geolocation Z, but that's the corrective. So that's in other words, these are all relative. In other words, you can't say, looking at these numbers, you can't use this number and say, oh, I'm within 4 meters of the real position. No, you're within, that means that the average distance from the mean of all of your points from where it's calculated where it should be is off by as much as 4 meters. So these are all relative measures of accuracy here, not absolute. These should actually all be a little bit high. That's actually a little bit more. These should all be, ideally you'd want them all below a meter. If you were going to say, the relative accuracy is within a meter. So it's not. In this case, the Y is a little bit higher. Probably has something to do with us choosing the 1/2 image scale. That would go down a bit. We could run that. I could run that and publish that report. Okay. And this is just processing data. These numbers will go down and they'll turn into absolute accuracy if you, so this does say absolute geolocation variance. Okay. They'll turn into absolute accuracy if you include ground control zones. So that's something that we're going to do. We're going to talk about. Anything else I want to include and talk about there? But this also exists on the internet. I don't know if it's finished. It still says it's processing. So this one just shows the defaults. So we could look and see what the differences were once it processes. Okay. Close that up. Now once this is done, we can see the results of the output. So the cameras here, all of our cameras calibrate, every single one. If they didn't, there would be another uncalibrated cameras you'd be able to check that on and off. So we can turn this off and on, and we can see the camera calibration. We can also get specific and look at the camera itself, one camera individually. You can zoom into that camera. That's the very first camera. Interestingly, it looks like that camera is a little bit twisted. Maybe that's why it took a little. That was the very last camera to calibrate. Remember when we were looking at the things change. This is a picture, and all these little orange crosshairs are the key points that it identified. I'm going to choose an image that has more contrast. Forgot where that one. Look at how much more how many more key points that one got. So it's not just looking at a little thing like I said, a little patch. You know, it sees this area and it decides that's a key point. For some reason, around this tree, it didn't find a whole lot of key points. This is also probably a tree. We can look at every single one and look at the key points that it calculated. Now here's one over water. Hardly any key points over the water. It didn't find anything to identify. If I zoom in here, that key point that it found looks pretty, unsure. I'm not sure. You can actually click on any of these individual points. These would have to be matches. Okay? These are 3D matches. You click on that, and then you can zoom out. And you can see which cameras had that. Which cameras had that in there. So that's the ray heading out from the camera that were used to triangulate the position of that object, that thing that it hit. And that's its location in 3D space computed from the center points of those images. So these are all the similar objects that it found. So in other words, now we can go through and say, oh, look, it sees this and this and this and this. All of those, it sees them as the same object. Okay? You can actually, if you want to, you can go in and modify these, or just say, I don't want that to be included. You can actually hit delete. I'm not going to do it right now, but if you really wanted to tune your model, you could do that. And notice that what it's actually identifying, so we can actually zoom out and see what it's identifying. What it's actually identifying is related to the shadow. You see how it's a little light spot in the middle of a shadow. So if we decided, I really don't think that that's a good spot to choose because it's moving on the ground. We could throw that one out. I think that in the time period that we did it, it's probably fine. But it will contribute, even the small amount that it changes will contribute to the error that it sees. I'm just going to hit delete. It really doesn't work. There is a way to do it, but you can look it up in the help. These are all, this is an automatic tie point, number 2283. So we've got a bunch of automatic tie points. Didn't select anything. Notice that when we kind of zoom out here, that we don't have any automatic tie points really in the middle of this. It's like it's not clear water, so it's hard to get automatic tie points in there.
What's the difference between the orange and
Yeah, so not exactly sure, but the orange ones have this error bar associated with them. See how when I click that one, it's that orange one right there? That's the orange one, that's an orange one, that's an orange one, that's that orange one. These don't have orange ones associated with them. And they don't have the error bar around them. So I'm not sure whether that means that there is a greater error. I think that it's more likely that the orange ones are the ones that are used to calculate the position. Let's see.
They have an ATP number on it.
Right, and the other ones don't. So it only used those four, because it really only needs four to calculate it. And so there is a danger in overfitting, like saying, okay, well that is one. So this one isn't included right now in the. Looks like it isn't included in the model, so it's only included the orange ones, and the other ones are just inferred. So we can read more about that there. Okay. So that's the cameras, and we turn those off. These are the tie points. Now, next week not next week, in 2 weeks when we go to do the by EPR data, we're going to bring in our own ground control points. That's what GCP stands for. And MTP stands for manual tie points. A manual tie point goes into the model the same way an automatic tie point does. A manual tie point is just you going into a number of images and saying, yes, that is the same object. So if we wanted to do that in our workflow, we would go into the GCP MTP manager. That's what we're going to do in 3 weeks when we get back from EPR. We're going to enter our own ground control points. Now, we're going to have to import some GCPs. We don't have any to import right now, but these are going to be high accuracy GPS locations. And so we're going to specify that they have a higher accuracy associated with them. And then choose them. However, we can add a manual tie point without that. A manual tie point is just a point that you say is the same point. It's just like these other automatic tie points, but you found it. And so you can just go into the Ray Cloud editor and then find a point that's the same. So we're going to make this a manual tie point, and if we were doing a 3D ground control point, we're going to do manual tie point. Then we have to bring up the individual images. And then we select these manual tie points. I gotta remember the workflow for this one. It's been a little while. Usually it's not very necessary to add manual tie points. The workflow for the ground control points, which we'll do next week, is to actually to actually enter the X, Y, and Z location here on the horizontal, and then those points show up on the ground once you do that. So I forgot the workflow here for the manual tie points. So we'll look at that when we do that next week. All right. So if you did add some more manual tie points, you could go in and then rematch and optimize again using those manual tie points. And it would rerun this initial processing, and it would use that to recalibrate the cameras. And it would assume that the manual tie point that you entered, you really wanted in there. And so if it was not accurate, it might actually throw out more of the automatic tie points that it created. And so it can be detrimental if it's not really a point to include. All right, let's go back here and look at a few other things. We talked about this issue, this error propagation issue. You want to make sure you have enough. Really, there's kind of a cutoff that the software and most literature recommends of having about 1,000 matches per image. So we had plenty of images. 28 images, we only had like 13 matches. That's really not enough for there not to be this error propagation that occurs. So on the sides and in the lake, that explains why you see some of that error. Okay. Snow, sand, trees, water, those are all areas where you're going to have problems, particularly trees at low altitude. Trees at high altitude do seem to work pretty well. Okay. The quality of your camera affects precision. So you mostly want precision is going to be affected by overlap. It's going to be affected by flying height. These are kind of like ballpark numbers. They're not like gospel or anything. But you've got overlap, flying height, and megapixel counts. Those are the big three that influence your precision. We talked about how those influence your precision already. So flying height gives you more distance between each point, so that's important. Overlap lets you get multiple shots of the same value, of the same area, so that's going to affect it. And megapixel counts makes your pixels smaller, so that's going to affect precision. Image sharpness is also important. Now, this number is within reason. If you have a very sharp image, it's going to improve it, but not as much as some of these other parameters. Obviously, if you have a totally blurry image, it's going to have the same effect as the megapixel count. You're basically making your image less certain where something is if it's blurry. And then one of the things that lots of people focus on is having the image oriented straight down. And as long as it's not affecting image sharpness, your image orientation doesn't really matter a whole lot. In other words, if we go back to this image here, see how these images are all facing slightly different directions? It's actually not a problem, and in some cases can actually be a benefit. The only real problem is when this isn't random. It's always like off slightly, because that can actually cause the final result to be curled up. It assumes that you were maybe flying up higher each time. Okay. Obviously, GPS location is important. I meant to, because I flew Red Bluff a number of times, I meant to show how far off. Even if you have 1 meter RMSE, in other words, your average of 1 meter off, multiple images can still be off by that 3 to 5 meter mark. So although your internal accuracy can be good, your overall accuracy is is not good. So how do you compensate for that? Well, the best way is with ground control points. So ground control points are very important. So I've created some of these, I've made some plywood targets that we're going to use next week. These aren't plywood. The reason why I like to use the plywood targets is they stay in place. They're a little bit heavier to carry around, but these need to be staked in. So we're going to put these throughout the area we're going to fly in 2 weeks. And we're going to take a high precision GPS and practice recording the location within, the reported accuracy of the GPS is within 2 centimeters. And so we'll know the position of these locations. And then we'll go through the workflow of actually inputting these ground control locations into it. And you'll be able to see how it affects the camera. Usually mostly in the flying height, because that's the one that's the most off. But you'll see how it affects the camera positions and all of them. So we need to have these. And they need to stay in the same place, and they need to be in place before the drone flies. So when we go next week, or in 2 weeks, the first thing we're going to do is lay out all these things in strategic locations. Then we're going to fly the drone, and some of us will be collecting the ground control data, and then after the drones fly, then we can collect all of these points. So what makes a location strategic? Okay. Well, first of all, we need to have at least 3 in our image. Preferably, you want about 5 in your image. And that's what I would do. But you need to have 3, otherwise the software won't even care if you don't have. If you have 2, it says, no, they have 3. So we'll see that in the workflow. Once we add the 3rd ground control point, it'll start calculating how accurate the internal relative location of the 3 ground control points is. You need to have at least 3. It's best to have 5 as your minimum. And then and that's per 1,000 images. We're probably not going to get to 1,000 images, but we could. So we're gonna shoot for having about 8 to 10 ground control points because we're going to be right at that 1,000 image mark. By the way, I'll say that. So they should be well spaced. They can actually harm geolocation if they're not. In other words, if your ground control points are all like, let's just say we did these 3 ground control points, we didn't have any of these ground control points. They can actually hurt your model in that case. Why? Well, because it'll force these 3 points to be in their proper locations. And if there's any error at all, it's actually going to propagate that through along a trend line. So these could be really far away. You need to have your ground control points well spaced out. They should be what's called either a real-time kinematic, that's what we're going to use next week, or post-process kinematic GPS. In other words, what that means is that you're actually using 2 GPS receivers. One GPS receiver is the GPS receiver that you have in the field. The other GPS receiver is at a known location, where it knows down to like the millimeter what the proper XYZ position of that location is. And it's broadcasting a correction. The correction is autocorrelated. In other words, the correction in this location is very similar to the correction in this location. And it's only slightly off from this position. And the further you get away, the more off the corrective factor is. Okay, but yeah. So we're going to have one that actually has a cell phone data link connection to a known location. It's going to be constantly broadcasting that location. So we're going to be collecting in real time the proper GPS location. Now that's not necessary. That's not necessary, but it's convenient. You could also collect it, and most of those base stations that are collecting the precise location and the error are also collecting it constantly and logging it. And so you can do that as part of a post-processing step. We'll do that in class as well. So we're gonna be doing real-time kinematics, but I'll also show you the remote processing of that data. That's important skill, for whatever geographic, geology application you had. If you want to get high precision GPS data, it's kind of nice to know how to do that. Okay. So the general term for that is called differential correction. So differential correction that's in real time is called real-time kinematic, and differential correction that's done post-processing is called post-processing, post-PPK, post-processing kinematic. So the summary, though, is that there's actually two GPS receivers. One is at a known location. The U have down to close to a millimeter. You can set up your own base station. Okay? Usually, what you do in that case, when you set up a base station, you take a GPS and you just have it sit there for a couple days. You average all those values so that it gets down as close as it gets to the proper value, and then you can use that position to correct the other position. But we're not going to go through that workflow in this class. We're just going to use the existing network of continuously operating reference stations called cores. There's already a bunch of core stations out there that are continuously operating. They're spaced throughout the United States. They're usually about 70 to 80 miles apart from each other. So we'll use one of those. So if you do a post-processing, there's corrections are performed after the data is collected. We'll go through this workflow even though we'll be doing this. Corrections are performed while the data is being collected. In either case, you need some specialized hardware to communicate either afterwards or during with the base stations. Sometimes it's proprietary. All right. Now, we didn't. These last few slides are actually these last few steps, and I'm not gonna do these. Well, actually, I will do these right now because this machine is. I don't know who else is using it, but I can just start running it, and we'll find out. You want to uncheck this one unless you want to rerun it. And so what's going to happen now when I hit start is it's going to go through these last few. It's going to go through these last few steps, and these steps take a lot longer. So the point cloud and mesh, and here, except for this right here, you're no longer specifying anything that has to do with the quality of the outputs. This does. So when it goes and tries to create the additional points, the default is actually to use a half image size. That's one reason why I chose half image size beforehand, because in the end, your points are really calculated by default at half image size. You can increase this back to 1 image size if you want to go really accurate. So that's going to take a lot more time, though. It's going to go through, and it's going to, now that it knows where all these cameras are, it's going to go through and say, can I see some other points in this? Are there any points around this key point? Are there any points around this point? It's going to create tons and tons of more points until it gets to this point density, which the default is just optimal, which means it's going to try to find as many as it can. Well, I guess high probably means that. Low means it's going to try to find less. Here's the minimum number of matches. In other words, it has to find the same point in 3 images. If you want to make it go faster and be more precise, you can change that to 4. But 3 is the default. Now, all the rest of these things that are in here are more about the outputs themselves. So this is going to classify the point cloud. It's going to try to find out what things are ground, what things are trees, and what things are buildings. It's got this is actually a newer addition to the software. And then these are different formats. And lots of these are different formats. These are different formats for your point cloud. These are different formats for your textured mesh and how high resolution your textured mesh is going to be. Okay? There's different software packages you can use to import your textured meshes. If your image has a lot of dark and bright areas, you might want to experiment with this. Sometimes I think it does more harm than good to try to color balance the image. And then, yeah, that's it. So this is your 3 orthomosaic. By default, this is going to be 1 times the ground sampling distance. You can also adjust that a bit. And then this is all about just format. What format you want it in? GeoTIFF, you want it to be tiled out. Tiled out means that it cuts it into little manageable chunks for you. If you're going to serve it up on the internet, that's an advantage. But typically, you just want this one, the GeoTIFF. So, and then that's the only thing left. You run it, and you're going to get those. And we'll show the results of those next time we meet. But those will be files that you can import into a GIS. And they'll look kind of like the snapshots that we got in the quality report, but they'll be much more detailed. They'll be at 1 times ground sampling distribution, and they'll be filled in with. See how this looks pretty filled in? This is going to fill in all the little gaps that it can. Obviously, it's still not going to be able to find a whole lot of points in the lake, but it's going to fill in all the little gaps that it can fill in, and make that look a lot better. All right. Okay, I almost mentioned this earlier. So the last thing that I want to do is show. Last thing I want to do is show. There we go. If you click here, location of field trip. I guess you have to hit this little guy to go out. So this is where we're going. Right there. This is where we're going. We're gonna be mapping these 2 sandbars and like a little bit outside of it. Okay. So if you want to go in as an assignment. I guess you won't really turn anything in. So if you want to plan a mission for this area, that would be great. I'll find a mission too. Okay? We want to fly this area at about 400 feet. But I also want to try flying it a little bit lower and see how it compares. We're getting better data. I don't think that it'll map really well in the woods, but we're mostly concerned with how this river is changing. So we're mostly concerned about the sandbars. And here, I'll show you. We flew this. Frank and I flew this a couple years back. Here, this is what this other slide is. We flew this a couple years ago, and these are some of the outputs from Pix4D. I couldn't actually find. I tried to find the raw data. I know I have it, and so we'll compare it when we're done. I'll just show it right here. You can see that when we flew this originally, the drone worked really well for this first sandbar, but on the second sandbar, the drone wasn't receiving any signal. And so I just set it in free flight mode, and I tried to make patterns that were the right places, but this was me just flying around, and this was in a pre-programmed mission. And so we have some data that we're going to compare this to because we also took a high resolution GTF on this data that we calculated. So the idea here is to compare these. We may not, just like with Red Bluff, we may not be able to get, it'll be interesting to see how precise we can get. But don't have, yeah. So it's a little bit hard to see, but this is actually a shelf right here, because the bank is being cut by the river here. The river's coming in, the bayou here is flowing, actually it's flowing this direction, right? It's either flowing this direction, I think it's flowing this direction. I think it's flowing this direction, and it's cutting into the bank here. So that's changing a lot. The location of these sandbars and the size of the sandbars is changing a fair bit. The landowner, this is probably the landowner has planted some vegetation here to see if that'll affect things. It'd be nice if we had the Pittsburgh EDA to show up, but that's what we're going to do. So what you could do is plan a mission. I think it's flowing into the Mississippi, which means it's flowing this direction. Bring that up. Last year we parked here to fly this area, and then we parked here to fly this area. And so yeah, plan a few missions at 3 to 400 feet, and I'd be interested to know. If there are ways that we can get this area. What are the minimum, the smallest number of flights that we can get to get that area at 400 and 300 feet? That's what we want to do. Create those. So you want to if you want to send a screenshot or post it, or maybe I'll put that on Canvas as a discussion item, and I'll post a few options, and anybody wants to join in on the discussion there. But that's the area that we're going to fly. We're going to fly this area, and we have to have a plan for the ground control points that we're going to fly. It'd be nice to get some in the woods, but it might not really be practical. So we're mostly concerned about the sandbar, so we're going to get some here and some here, and some over here. Yeah, we forwarded this area last time we were there. We just walked across. Now, I'm not going to make anybody walk across the river, but right. Yes, that's a good point. So, if you go on this field trip, like I said, I won't make anybody cross the river, but we probably will cross the river right here. So if you want to, see everywhere, yeah, you might want to wear appropriate attire for getting wet. Last time we were here, Frank and I brought our daughters, we parked 2 years ago, so they're and they played for 2 hours, so we did all the work. So anyway, wear field appropriate attire. Let's see what else. You might want to bring some water. If it's a hot day, I'll try to bring some water too. We probably could stop at some place to eat, or even bring a sack lunch. Like we could just do drive-through on the way back or something. Because we'll probably, if we leave at 9:30, we'll probably get there before, like right around 11, and then it'll probably be like a normal day where it's about a 2 or 3 hour exercise to collect the data, and it'll be a little bit longer because we're going to collect the ground control data, and then we'll drive home. So I wouldn't anticipate getting home at any particular time, but I think we'll get back before the close of business, like 5 or so. I think that's a safe estimate. Even if we spent 3 hours there, we'd be done by 2. And even if we stopped somewhere, about, let me see how far it is. Directions to here. North America. U.S. Senator North America. It's about 2 hours. Yeah, that's what I remember. So you'll probably get there about 11:30. I'd say we leave by, we'll probably leave by 2. And then, even if we stop on the way home, we'll get home by 5. Yeah. And then I realize it'll be longer for y'all if y'all come. I'm pointing to the village. Okay. Yeah. All right. So next week is going to be a proctored test exam for the FAA. Okay. So I won't be here, but somebody will be here to proctor the exam, and so that'll be next week. The week after, what we'll do is we'll meet at 9:30 in the parking lot like we usually do. But we're going to get in the big. So there's enough room for everybody. If everybody wants to come, there's enough room, but I know that not everybody can. We'll still be able to participate in the processing of the data. And so I'll try to document it as best we can, the process. Okay. All right.